It is not yet widely recognized that the livestock industry has become a major threat to the world's economy, to the environment, to consumer health, and to the food security of nations and of generations to come. The world's 4 billion livestock are raised under either pastoral, rangeland conditions or under more intensive husbandry conditions in less arid regions. There is a clear correlation between pastoral and nomadic livestock production and the spread of deserts worldwide. Areas of desertification in various countries are caused in part by ecologically unsound livestock husbandry practices. Improper livestock practices and destruction of vegetation combine to cause environmental degradation. Overstocking results in overgrazing, soil erosion, and also poor herd nutrition and productivity. These problems are often compounded by diseases and inadequate veterinary preventive medicine. Non-sustainable agricultural practices have led to the demise of past civilizations. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Soil Conservation Service report has documented how deforestation and poor livestock husbandry practices have led to the demise of civilizations and empires, especially in the Middle East, over the past 7,000 years. Cattle once thrived some 3,000 years BC in the Algerian Central Sahara, which is now a desert. This copy of a rock painting from Tassili in Ajer, Algerian Central Sahara, 2,900 BC, shows how abundant cattle once were in this region. Non-sustainable agricultural practices and poor range management continue to contribute to serious environmental degradation today. Poverty and famine in many regions of the world are linked with destructive livestock and other agricultural practices. The increasing human population, now at 5.4 billion, necessitates a radical shift toward a more sustainable use of natural resources, as well as rigorous constraints on population growth. Increasing human population growth has resulted in deforestation in many parts of the world for fuel and to clear more land for crop production as well as for livestock production. Deforestation is a major contributing factor to the greenhouse effect of global warming, since trees absorb carbon dioxide, one of the greenhouse gases that traps heat in the lower atmosphere. This problem is compounded by the widespread practice of burning both forests and rangeland to stimulate new growth for livestock and to control brush. Regular burning actually leads to a loss of soil nitrogen. Deforestation, especially in the Amazon, is a significant contributing factor to global warming. Hundreds of thousands of acres of tropical forests being burned and felled to clear land primarily for livestock production by government-subsidized cattle ranchers. Regions where livestock are raised intensively, especially in Europe, have been linked with the destruction of forests through acid rain derived from ammonium sulfate and other gases from animal wastes. Livestock wastes also result in significant quantities of methane production, which is now recognized as a major greenhouse gas, the accumulation of which contributes to global warming. Since its beginning some 8,000 years ago, livestock farming has waged war against predators, which has led to the further degradation of natural ecosystems and the loss of biodiversity. Modern indiscriminate methods of predator control, including traps and poison baits, have resulted in serious ecological imbalances and the eruption of pest problems, especially of small rodents, which compete with livestock for forage in the absence of predators that normally keep their numbers in check. As a consequence of the livestock industry's war against predators, costing billions of dollars over the years in the U.S. at taxpayers' expense, many predator species are now endangered, like the wolf in North America, Europe, and Asia. Once, vast herds of buffalo roamed the open ranges and prairie plains of the United States. Uncontrolled hunting and poor rangeland management have resulted in the virtual extermination of not only the buffalo or bison, but also bighorn sheep, elk, and pronghorn. Such loss of biodiversity is a cardinal sign of environmental degradation and means an overall loss of rangeland productivity. More intensive livestock husbandry practices entail the use of confinement buildings, which are to be considered pathogenic and not conducive to livestock health, and also feedlot operations. These intensive systems of cattle production are responsible for many health and welfare problems. According to the U.S. National Research Council report, Alternative Agriculture, the total death and disease losses in the U.S. livestock is estimated at $4.6 billion annually. Losses in cows from mastitis is around $2 billion annually, and losses from pneumonia in hogs and cattle is estimated at some 800 million. Intensive livestock production is not adequately integrated with other agricultural practices. The nutrient loop of recycling animal manure that once connected crops and livestock has been broken, resulting in high fertilizer bills, high waste disposal costs, and widespread pollution of surface and groundwaters. Farm animal wastes contain potentially harmful quantities of nitrogen, phosphorus, bacteria, and feed additive residues, including a variety of drugs and chemicals like arsenic, selenium, copper, and zinc. Another related problem associated with livestock production is the need for water. Cattle in particular having a very high water requirement, averaging over 9,000 liters per year per animal. Some 300 to 400 gallons of water are used in the U.S. to produce 1 pound of beef. A reduction in the production and consumption of meat is clearly necessary, not only for economic and environmental reasons, but also for reasons of public health. There is increasing medical evidence of the contribution of high animal fat and protein consumption to a variety of human diseases. High animal protein and fat consumption is linked with various forms of cancer, osteoporosis, arteriosclerosis, heart attack, kidney disease, and gallbladder disease. Billions of dollars are lost every year when millions of people develop bacterial food poisoning from meat and other animal produce. The world's meat industry needs to be drastically reformed to embrace the principles of humane stewardship, which includes the land ethic of an ecologically sound, sustainable, and socially just agriculture. We must look closely at the real costs of livestock production. Producing beef under feedlot husbandry is the most inefficient way of producing animal protein. Rangeland lamb and beef production are much more efficient, provided the rangeland is not irreparably degraded. The estimated inputs of grain, energy, and water to produce 1 pound of meat, eggs, and milk reveal a clear trend of decreasing efficiency, with confinement hog and beef feedlot operations in the U.S. showing the greatest inefficiencies. This is principally because of the high costs of grain and soybean production. Yet in the U.S., public taxes underwrite some 50% of these costs via subsidies to the animal feed industry, a cost not fairly reflected in the price of meat in the grocery store. Ironically, contract meat producers tend to overproduce, which lowers their revenues while the grocery store prices remain the same. Intensive monocultures of wheat and of corn and soybean raised to feed farm animals require costly and harmful inputs of synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides, which has increased dramatically in recent years. With mounting evidence that most contemporary agricultural practices are non-sustainable in the long term, the urgency to develop alternative, ecologically sound agriculture is considerable. One definition of humane sustainable agriculture is as follows. Humane sustainable agriculture produces adequate amounts of safe, wholesome food in a manner that is ecologically sound, economically viable, equitable, and humane. Humane sustainable agriculture meets farm animals' basic physical and behavioral requirements for health and well-being through a food and agriculture system that respects all of nature, humans, soil, water, plants, and animals, wild as well as domestic. Intensive livestock farming practices are energy intensive rather than labor intensive. This results in local unemployment and a decline of rural communities. They are capital intensive and rely upon the economies of scale and size. This results in the elimination of small farms and alternative agricultural systems. With large herds and flocks, there is increased incidence of animal disease and problems associated with pollution and manure disposal. Overcrowding and other husbandry practices result in animal deprivation, distress, stress, disease, and suffering. The increased dependence on drugs results in consumer and animal health hazards. A humane, sustainable animal agriculture recognizes that refinement, reduction, and replacement are important animal husbandry principles. Refinement of husbandry practices are needed to reduce stress and disease. A reduction in the numbers of farm animals being raised for human consumption is essential for humane, economic, and environmental reasons. Their replacement with high-quality cereals, legumes, and other vegetables, fruits, and nuts is a wise economic and public health decision. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food Guide Pyramid clearly recognizes the importance of reduced animal fat and protein consumption and increased consumption of cereals, fruits, and vegetables for most Americans. Humane, sustainable animal agriculture recognizes the basic rights of animals as human responsibilities. These include right breeding to increase disease resistance, right rearing and socialization, right nutrition, and right environment to optimize overall animal health, well-being, and productivity. Animal health and well-being are too often sacrificed in order to maximize productivity. With 5.4 billion people on the planet and 4 billion livestock, such changes in dietary habits and agricultural practices are crucial for the future well-being of all our relations. Native peasant farmers of the Third World should not be encouraged to emulate the industrial nation's addiction to meat, and their low-input sustainable agricultural practices should be respected and not obliterated by colonial agribusiness, aid and development enterprises. Through careful study of their often highly efficient traditional agricultural practices and of the various environments or bioregions they inhabit, they can be assisted to help restore the land where needed, as by reforestation, and their livestock can be raised even more sustainably. Small-scale livestock improvement programs, as by Heifer Project International in Tanzania, East Africa, have combined soil conservation and regeneration with other sustainable agricultural practices, where the production of crops and forages is closely integrated, ecologically and economically, with humane, small-scale dairy cow milk production. This benefits countless families and village communities, where women in a polygamous society are the main food producers and workforce. But they face the ideological and economic opposition of such large organizations as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, AID, and FAO, who, for example, have helped underwrite a variety of non-sustainable colonial-style agricultural projects, especially monocrop plantations and livestock development projects that benefit the rich and further disenfranchise the poor. One of the most destructive of all long-term aid and development programs funded in part by the World Bank and the European Economic Community is in Botswana. It has led to the extinction of zebra, once numerous in the south of the country, and to the demise of hundreds and thousands of buffalo, wildebeest, and other wildlife by encouraging an export beef industry. Thousands of kilometers of veterinary fences have been put up to control the spread of foot and mouth disease to cattle, primarily from wild buffalo. These fences have caused animals great suffering and the demise of hundreds of thousands of migratory wildlife species who are blocked by and even become ensnared in these fences of death. It is a tragic irony that Botswana's heavily subsidized beef, produced at such great cost to wildlife, is exported to Europe, where 500,000 tons of European farmers' surplus beef is being held in cold storage in 1992 by their governments at taxpayers' expense. Countless other species have been harmed by pesticides sprayed over thousands of square miles to kill the tsetse fly in Botswana. This carries sleeping sickness, a disease that affects cattle but is harmless to wildlife that have natural immunity. A disrupted but once relatively sustainable African livestock culture will mean the end of Africa's Eden unless governments and development agencies alike recognize the role of livestock in sustainable agriculture in Africa and elsewhere in the world. We should not forget the devastating environmental consequences of the opening of the West to the cattle industry in the US in the 19th century. The old cattle trails provide living evidence today of how extensive the cow cult became in a few decades, from Montana and the Dakotas to New Mexico and Texas. Millions of cattle were raised on the range, causing irreparable damage to the wild grasslands of the West and Southwest in order to provide the growing industrial centers of the East with beef. Government subsidies and consumer support of intensive feedlot operations, of inhumane veal production systems, and of intensive poultry and hog farming systems in the industrial world should be opposed by all, and their adoption by less developed countries strongly discouraged. If alternative, socially just, humane and sustainable agriculture is to ever find a safe and secure roothold for our future stewards of the land, it must be based upon local and regional public support of farmers and ranchers who care for the land, and be supported by state and federal governments. In the US, over 400,000 family farms have gone out of business since 1985, and in other developed nations the same trend is evident, fewer and larger farms. But these large factory-scale agribusiness farms are overproductive and in the long term non-sustainable. Their wholesale use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers is not only harmful, but not cost-effective. The agribusiness alliances of the livestock and poultry industries with multinational grain merchants and with the petrochemical pharmaceutical industrial complex must be confronted. Local family farmers who practice humane and sustainable agriculture must be supported. We must also support traditional, ecologically sound, natural farming practices like rotational grazing, organic farming and animal feed production, permaculture, and other alternative agricultural practices and innovations. We should also avoid the temptations and convenience of fast foods, especially the hamburger, some 35% of which comes from spent dairy cows in the US, and may also contain beef from other countries where rainforests are fast disappearing and rangeland turning to desert. The high-technology utopian dream of industrial farming is not cost-effective. Neither the land nor farm animals can be treated as non-living resources, units of production, and as mere commodities. The agribusiness experiment in such factory farming is over. It doesn't work. Humane ways of raising livestock and poultry under less intensive and ultimately healthier conditions can be researched, adopted, and improved upon. And they can be better integrated with whole farming systems that are ecologically sound, where livestock and people alike are consuming in balance with the optimal carrying capacity of the region, and in the process help restore the natural biodiversity of the region they inhabit. Past civilizations held cows, among other creatures wild and tame, in far greater reverence than in industrial society today. We live by a different currency today, for the only reverence for the all-giving cow is as a commodity, mere chattel and capital. We should never forget that cattle have harmed no one, but in the process of treating them as we do, we have turned them into a sentinel, indicator species whose overabundance is no longer a measure of wealth, but rather has become a major cause of global ecological damage, disease, environmental pollution, and climatic change. A change in attitude, what we eat, and in how our food is produced will do much to make this world a better place for all our relations, for generations to come.